Hello, BookTube. Well, we've started a new week. Are you feeling a little woozy? A little lightheaded? Perhaps you need a supplement of some kind? Well, you've come to the right place. Dr. Steve is in with a literature supplement. I am giving you your first great literature supplement. This is an addition, a shot in the arm, or wherever, to my 100 greatest books of all time. This is your weekly literary supplement. So prepare yourself. These are 10 great books that I thought we'd go over in addition as a supplement, as an addendum to my 100 greatest books list. And we'll start with, I pulled these pictures off the internet, so, imagine them or go and look for them. We'll start with a sprawling epic of ancient Chinese literature. This is The Journey to the West, where a disparate group of characters go in search of sacred literature. They go in search of sacred scriptures, and they ride a dragon to do it, and it's amazing. It is amazing. I pulled this cover off the internet. This is Anthony Yu's translation, which is multi-volume, I believe, for the University of Chicago or the University of Princeton University. It was the University Press that did this, and I have to say, it is the best one that I've read. So this is just random chance. Usually the covers don't have anything to do with what I want to talk about, but in this case, you probably do want to look for this translation just because it's complete and really, really well annotated. But again, if you happen to find a translation of this that's not bowdlerized and it's not abridged, that works better than this one for you, then do that. But this is everything. It's an adventure story, but it is guided and given internal structure by philosophy, by deeper ponderings, by the quest for wisdom. This is in large part a quest for an object, but it is also a quest for wisdom. And it's done by such a wonderfully winning, disparate group of characters that you will love it. You will absolutely love it. It works like so many of these ancient epics do. It works on so many levels. Then we'll do a classic of German literature, German stagecraft, although you hardly ever see it staged. This is Goethe's Faust. And this is the story of a scholar who is willing to do anything to gain ultimate knowledge, to gain the ultimate bro-tube knowledge of the world and how it works, to have his beard ultimately strokable. And to gain that knowledge, he literally makes a deal with the devil. And part one of Faust is the story of that horrible deal and the downfall of the scholar Faust. There's a part two to this that Goethe wrote. It's, I think, a little bit more up in its own head, a little bit less accessible, but so you don't need to read the two of them, is what I'm saying. Part one will be just fine. But I couldn't leave it off the list, now could I? And then this next one, again, this is just a cover that I pulled off the internet, but this is the great Roman poet Ovid. Wrote poetry his whole life. All of his works of poetry are classics of one kind or another. But his great work is the Metamorphoses. This is a book, a long poem about change, in which Ovid takes all the old stories that were going around from Greece or from Rome, all the old mythological stories about the gods turning people into bugs or into trees or into stars or into swans or into spiders, men into women. Ovid saw all of those stories. Of course, as he was tutored, he was raised on those stories. And he thought, well, the theme running through all of these things is change. Things changing from one to the other, just as the world changes. From the Golden Age to the Silver Age to the Bronze Age, so too do all these stories ripple with change. And he embraces that in this book. Not only retelling those stories, but also changing his narrative himself as he goes, so that his narrative also ripples and changes. Ending with the greatest transformation of them all, which again he puts on the page, which is that I and my book will also transform into something immortal. The book is made of perishable material. I am a mortal man, and yet there will be a transformation, a metamorphosis that will happen with this book, in that it will become immortal, and he was completely correct. It's enchanting. Find a translator that works for you. There have been many, many translators of this work. Find one that works for you, and especially that conveys the playfulness. And then stick with it. You will love it. Then this next one, I am going to call this a book. The author wrote it for his whole life, and you never see it printed as just one book. You should, but you never do. He meant it as just one book, though. The book is Ab Urbe Condita. It's from the founding of the city, and it was by the historian Livy. We spent a lot of time in Rome researching this thing, and you will always see this thing broken up into little volumes. especially if you're looking at it now, at what's available now. Penguin Classics and Oxford World Classics do Livy, and they give you almost all of him, but it's all broken up. It's not one book. And some of the editors of those fragmentizations will defend them by saying that Livy did write it that way and would often dine out on readings of his latest segment. People were curious to know how he's getting along, what he's doing next. There's large parts of Livy's book that we don't have anymore, that we really wish we did have. But the parts that we have make a huge book, and they are wonderful. So I would suggest, although you will find this in multiple volumes, I would suggest that you read them all together. As big as that is. It's a big thing. You can just imagine how big the Unabridged would be. Another big book, but also great and also foundational. This is the Histories of Herodotus, who decided, apparently first of all human beings, decided to tell the story of the past. Not really to mythologize it, not much, not any more than he could help as a man of his time, but to tell it and to compare different versions. To talk about history as though it were a thing that can be studied, perfected, and shaped into a story of things that really happen. And it's wonderful. Herodotus is a great storyteller. And he also has been translated many, many times. So, and also, those translations have sometimes feel very different from each other. So this is another very important case where the translator makes a lot of difference. Try a few of them. Because Herodotus can be a little bit tough going. He's digging right into these stories, and he's assuming that you're interested. You might not be. So the translator skill is going to be all important here. So find one that you like and stick with them. Then we have a novel. There weren't many novels on my 100 greatest books of all time list, but this one is on your supplement, your weekly supplement, the greatest novel of the 20th century. This is Thomas Mann's book, Magic Mountain. On the surface, it is very simple. A sickly man goes to a sanatorium to be cured. But it ends up being so much more than that, including one of the most unlikely love stories ever put on paper. And it, beyond all those things, the book epitomizes Mann's monumental narrative style. He couldn't always indulge himself in that. Sometimes he wrote short stories. Sometimes he wanted to write books that were a little fleeter of foot. But his natural register was monumental. And he gave full rein to that in 2 novels, really, and this one is a masterpiece. Just incredible. Again, the picture that I pulled off the internet is the translation by John Woods, but I think there have been a couple. Mann is not all that difficult to translate. He's not, there aren't many variations involved here, so any translation of yours will probably work quite well, but give a try to a few of them. This next one, unfortunately, that will not be much of a problem, much though I rail about it. This next one is an ancient work, a huge work. This is The Parallel Lives by Plutarch. Much the same as Livy, he wrote this his whole life, chipping away at it, with readers eagerly wanting to know what he was doing next. And these are a series of mini-biographies of ancient Greek figures and ancient Roman figures, usually balanced against each other with a connecting tissue essay comparing their lives. And Plutarch, more than any other ancient author, has been brutalized by his translators over centuries, brutalized by them. The connecting essays, you can usually kiss them goodbye. They're usually not in any English version of this. And the lives, which Plutarch constructed to work as a book, they're just quarry mined. Okay, well, you might know Alexander's name. Oh, you probably know Julius Caesar's name. Well, let's pull them out of here. Get rid of those connecting essays. Pull these out of where Plutarch intended them to be organically in his book, and just put them in a little book. Okay, so here are 8 lives from Plutarch, which is scandalous, but that is almost certainly the version of this book that you're going to get, is not just broken into little pieces like Livy is, but broken into little pieces that are then edited and slapped around. The poet John Dryden and a team of very hard-working translators worked to do this all as one book. That is still the only example like that. Incredible that I'm saying this, but it still is. So if you want to read this all as one book, well, Modern Library used to make this all as one book. In used form, I'm sure you can find that. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with segmented books. Oxford Road Classics makes a few volumes of Plutarch. Penguin Classics makes a few volumes of Plutarch. You're just going to have to deal with those and piece them together like some sort of jigsaw puzzle. But it's worth it. It's worth it. No matter whose translation you use, it's worth it. Plutarch is really, really good to read. This next one, it's short, it's a little bit odd, it's brilliant, it's great, but it has had, I don't think, more than one translation into English. I read a private translation. A friend of mine translated it for me. It was a thing that friends of mine used to do. We used to do it with each other. We'd translate things that we really liked to each other. I don't know, I could not find an English language cover to show you of this book. It's an ancient Japanese classic. It's the Soga Monogatari. So it's the story of two brothers. It's a revenge story of two brothers. And it extends from there, not very long. It's not a massive book. I never did get quite from my friend whether or not her translation was the whole of the Soga story. I don't know if... I never actually asked about that. It could be that, like so many other things in ancient Japanese or Chinese literature, it's the tip of the iceberg, and that the body of literature that this story is drawn from is immense. It could be that it's immense. That there's a huge backstory to Journey to the West, for instance. Gigantic backstory to it. Another book at the backstory of it. That could be true for this. And it could be that some really enterprising English translation of this, there should be 4 or 5 of them, would be immense. It would be 800 or 1,000 pages long. I don't know that. I don't know one way or another. I don't know anything about the provenance of this book. All I know is that my friend's translation was fantastic, and she assured me it was accurate. She wasn't putting her finger on the scale. So I want to recommend the Soga Monogatari, even though you'll never find it. I don't think you ever will. Then an Irish epic. This is an Irish epic, a fragment of a much larger body of Irish epics. This is the Táin. This is the version from Penguin Classics with translation by Kieran Carson. It's about a cattle raid, believe it or not. A lot of the action starts with one potentate enviously admiring the prize-winning bull of another potentate, and that kicks off a whole bunch of events, but there's so much more going on here. And it is the classic Irish combination of the grubby and the human and the epic and the divine. Very similar in that regard to the Icelandic sagas. Only I think, of course, that this has a lot more personality than all of them put together. But as long as we're talking about Icelandic sagas, we might as well finish with a gigantic sprawling epic. Fortunately, the Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition, the Nunnally translation, is great. So you have a translation that's readily available to you. Again, I'm just saying that translation is wonderful to read. I don't know the original. I'm recommending it as a reading experience, but if it doesn't work for you, fine. There is at least one earlier translation. Find that and try that. And this is Kristin Lavransdatter by Sigrid Undset, it's big, it's sprawling, it's multiple parts. You don't need to worry about the whole thing if you read the first part of this. Each part is a book. If you read the first part of this and it absolutely does not agree with you, well, it's not like I made the argument for Crime and Punishment that if the opening 100 pages or 200 pages of Crime and Punishment don't agree with you, you should stick with it, because it will flower into something that will agree with you. But that isn't true here. If you read the first part of this and you don't like it at all, don't bother. But I think you will. I think you'll find it strange and angry and fiery in a way that you weren't expecting. It's very, very good stuff. So there you go. That is your literature supplement for this week, just to keep your iron sulfides up. But will you need a supplement next week? We'll consult with Dr. Steve and find out. Thank you, BookTube.